Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Talk Show. Today, we're going to be looking at famous last words from Catholic saints.
That's right. We're going to look at the last words uttered by people like popes, saints, and martyrs. Some of these are the most fascinating things you'll ever hear, and it gives you a glimpse into what they were thinking as they went to their eternal reward.
All right, so today we're going to be looking at some last words from saints. I got to think we're going to be running the gamut on a few different styles here,
Yep.
going down through the ages.
Looking at last words has always been something that's really been fascinating to me, whether it's famous last words from presidents or historical figures, et tu, Brute, that kind of stuff. I always think that it's pretty illuminating as to what and where they were when they were dying and what their views on death were. And I think this sheds a lot of insight into these saints, into these popes, and especially into these martyrs. Now, before we get started, I want to make sure if you're watching this, click the like and subscribe button. It's the easiest way that you can support the Catholic Talk Show. It helps us reach a lot more people. And also, if you want to support the show, go to catholictalkshow.com/Patreon. So, I did some research for this and, I was thinking about this. I came up with the idea for this episode because I was thinking about the 7 last words of Christ, which is one of the greatest devotions any Catholic can do, right? And it's meditating on the 7 last words of Christ. And we've talked about that particular devotion in other episodes. If you don't know that devotion, go out and learn it. But real quick, the 7 last words of Christ, they're not 7 words. They're the 7 sayings, right? It's words meaning like, what are your words, right? So I'll give those real quick as a preface to this before we get into the last words of Pope, saints, and martyrs. So the first is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Luke 23:24. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Luke 23:43. Woman, behold your son. Behold your mother. John 19:26-27. My God, why have you forsaken me? Matthew 27:46. I thirst. John 19:28. It is finished. John 19:30. And finally, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Luke 23:46. Very powerful devotion to meditate on those. But it's also interesting that that last one, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. When I was doing the research for this episode, hundreds of saints picked that or said that as their last words in imitation of Christ. That them realizing in their moment of death, in articula mortis, that they knew they were dying. And in their last moment, they wanted to do the same that Christ did in his moment of death too. So I thought that was an interesting aspect to the research that I found on that. But 7 last words of Christ, incredibly powerful, Ryan.
Yeah, I think Fulton Sheen wrote a book about it that was really powerful. I read a few years ago. Either that or it was a YouTube video, but yeah, I think meditating on that, meditating on those words, you see everything from forgiveness, conversion, and then just that struggle, and letting go and letting God take you. And then you also see his mother being taken care of in the church. You're starting to get a sense of that. So it very powerful, different statements from Jesus. We've talked about a few other saints too before, on the show. So it's kind of neat to be able to just narrow in on these and talk about them.
Yeah, so let's get into it. So in that vein of choosing that as your last words in imitation of Christ, I wanted to put this at the beginning of the list was St. Augustine. So St. Augustine died in 430. The place where he was living was under siege by the Vandals, who were a heretical branch of Christianity. And he was sick, and his last words were, into your hands, O Lord. He didn't even finish the whole verse, but those, he definitely, being so learned, so knowledgeable of the scriptures and wanting so much to be in the imitation of Christ, that's what he chose as his last words. Now, Saint Francis of Assisi, really, really interesting. And I think his last words kind of reflect a lot of what we know about Saint Francis. So he died in 1226 from malaria or tuberculosis, which in medieval Italy, malaria and tuberculosis were incredibly lethal and incredibly common. So, but I love this. He said, "I have done my part. May Christ teach you yours."
Wow.
You know,
So there's probably some folks around him that were in his religious order. You got to presume that, right?
of course,
Yeah.
and I love that. It kind of in that vein of of preaching, of service, but still in humility. Look, I did my part. Don't, and he didn't say, now do what I did. He said, let Christ teach you yours. So, even into the last moment, service and focusing
Serving
on
others.
radically following what Christ said.
Yeah. Yeah. Even using his death to serve others and communicate that humility is the foundation of not just prayer, but also the direction and how you should approach God's will,
Yep.
in your life.
So another saint from the same era that I kind of consider the pillars of the 13th century and kind of the pillars of the late medieval revival of the church, Saint Dominic. It's crazy to think that Saint Dominic and Saint Francis were contemporaries living in the same area. They met each other in Rome, and one founded the Franciscans and one founded the Dominicans, and what that meant for the future of the church.
Mhm.
Um, so Saint Dominic, he died of a fever at Bologna in 1221. So a couple years, just a few before Saint Francis, and his last words were, and this is confident. Wow. Do not weep, for I shall be more useful to you after my death. That's kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi, like strike me down and I'll become more powerful than you can even imagine, right? you
We're
know,
getting a sense of that too with Jen. We kind of go through grief and you realize, she could do a lot more good from where she is than, down here, down here. But yeah, yeah, to know that, for that grace to come upon him to share that with other people, it's pretty bold, man.
yeah, he's just like, look, guys, it's okay. Look, I'm dying, but I'm going to be way more useful to you on the other side, which I
Yeah.
would absolutely probably say that is true, right? The prayers and the
100%.
intercession and the legacy of St. Dominic. I mean, I don't, not prophetic, but boldly truthful. So that was a really cool one to see. And it really did make me think of Obi-Wan Kenobi, death striking
Yeah.
him down and him becoming more powerful in the presence of God as an intercessor. Saint Teresa of Avila, an amazing, amazing saint. She died in
Powerful.
1582 of cancer, well, a hemorrhage from cancer. And this one, Saint Teresa of Avila, always had this mystic relationship, this mystic betrothal to Christ. She very much viewed Christ as her spouse mystically. Even in one of her visions, and this is a bit graphic, that um, she had a vision that her betrothal ring to Christ was the Holy Prepuce, which we've talked about on other episodes. And throughout her life, she viewed herself truly as married to Christ through the church. And her last words are really what you would expect from a spouse. And she said, "Oh, my Lord and my spouse, the hour I have longed for has come." That is the kind of thing that you hear, someone who's been married for 50 years saying, "I'm finally going home to see, you know, my wife or my husband or whatever."
Mhm.
It has that same sort of intimate love of a spouse.
Mm.
And I thought that was really interesting.
Great French saint.
Yep.
Great one. One of the great ones.
Wasn't she Italian?
Uh,
No, Spanish.
yes.
Spanish. Spanish.
She was Spanish. She was
Spanish.
Spanish.
She was somewhere from Europe. She was Spanish.
Wait, was she the one that got the papacy moved from France to Italy?
Yes, but she was
She did
born.
that from Spain.
Yeah. Well, no, she did that that would have been from France. But yeah, she was definitely born in Spain. All right, going on to Thomas Aquinas. His last words, and Ryan, I know you've experienced this with your father and with Jen, probably more recently than anyone could hope for. But St. Thomas's last words were the Viaticum prayer, that prayer of receiving communion on death. And it was, I receive the price of my soul's redemption. Ryan, you've been there. Unfortunately, in
Yeah.
the last 5, 6 years of too many people passing, but, seeing that moment of receiving the apostolic pardon and receiving communion upon death, what's that like, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, it's for us, it was very celebratory. Everybody was there. There's probably 15, 20 people in the room, and Father Raphael came and gave that to Jen, and we sung a song. There's a lot of joy, a lot of crying. It's kind of hard to explain, really. I know there's a lot of grace imposed. It felt a lot of grace was imposed on everybody. Just being very powerful and experiencing it, even at the moment of Jen's death, just the golly, like I just going back to that, it seems surreal, that experience. So, maybe it's the veil opening and maybe it's, God's mercy and wisdom, but for us, thank God it was remarkable, and something I think that's not gonna leave any of us,
Mhm.
in this life.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Um, so next one, Saint Therese of Lisieux. Saint Therese of Lisieux. She died of tuberculosis. She died pretty young, and I always find it fascinating that she's the patron saint of missionaries when she never left, her little convent, and it just shows the power of prayer, contemplation, and what religious sisters and religious men can provide to the church, being the power plant of prayer and energizing the church through their prayer. And, St. Therese of Lisieux, the little way, so simple, so basic, but so full of love and so almost like childlike in
Yes,
in
I
the
was
in the
gonna say that.
simplicity.
Yeah, this sweet there was a sweet little girl in there,
Yeah.
with a lot of the things that she wrote.
Yep. Her last words were, "My God, I love you." So simple. But my God, I love you. Her last moments, not save me, not cure me, not why did you do this to me? My God,
Mhm.
I love you. That's, that's I think very beautiful.
I think a lot of people too, when they pass, like my grandmother, I remember, my mom talking about it. There is it you know, it you can't really explain it, but there is kind of this, back and forth that goes on between where you're going and where you are,
Mm.
and, like, I remember my mom saying that, that my grandmother saw her horse there. And she's like she'd wake up and see people there, see her horse. So I'm just thinking when I heard that, maybe she was like, "My God, like, it's you," like, instead
I
of,
I have no doubt. I have no
like, a
doubt.
last word here, like, maybe again, it's all a mystery, but, like, maybe she's like, "Oh my god," like,
She's right
"Hey."
there. She's kind of transitioned. Yeah.
I got a funny story. My dad received the Viaticum, and, I went to go see him the next day, and I didn't know, and, he's like, "I saw Jesus, man," and my dad's like a very New York Italian. I was like, "Really? What'd he say?" He says, "Hey, man, how you doing? You're gonna stay a couple more days, all right?" I was like, "That's
Wow.
it?" He's like, "Yeah."
So Jesus
Some
speaks
encounters.
Jesus speaks like a New York Italian, which I think is
Yeah, maybe
comforting and
so.
terrifying at the same time.
Love you, dad.
Yeah. Yeah. God bless Ralph. Ryan, St. Catherine of Siena was the mystic and saint who got the popes to go back from
That's right.
Avignon to Rome. She also said, Father, into your hands I commend my soul and spirit, echoing Christ's words in Luke 23.
Beautiful.
Now, speaking of kind of being in that transitory stage and one foot on earth, one foot in eternity, this one. And if you know anything about Saint Alphonsus Liguori, I don't know if anyone has ever written more beautifully about Our Lady. Saint Alphonsus Liguori, if you have not read his books, they're pretty easy to digest. A lot of them are very short, but this man was Our Lady's poet laureate, right? This guy
Mhm.
spoke so beautifully and so trusting and did so much to help form Catholic devotion towards Our Lady. And he died in 1787, again, of tuberculosis, right? Pretty much if you didn't get killed, you died of tuberculosis in those ages.
Yeah.
And he said, I see Mary, she is beautiful,
Wow.
right?
There's that transitory
That's exactly it. Yeah.
behavior. Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I'm, broadening this out a little bit, you are thinking of the grace of a happy death, right? We pray for that.
Hmm.
And man, that sure would be happy to get the glimpse while your body is dying, to have that clear sense of hope in
What a
front of you.
mercy. Yeah. What a mercy.
Yeah. Yeah. And mercy, yeah. To have that would be beautiful. And the fact that, Our Lady was a part of it, such a big deal,
Yeah.
for him.
I like that you mention the grace of having a good death. And there's the
Mhm.
devotion to Saint Joseph, patron saint of the dying, for the prayers for a happy death, and that. But there's definitely prayers out there on prayers for a happy or holy death. Those are prayers that everyone should pray because
Mhm.
Matt Fradd. I was listening to him, and he said something really, I thought, that shocked me. It was really insightful. He's talking about, and I forget the exact context, but he was talking about, there's always people trying to figure out when Christ is going to return. We just went through this like last week where everyone's like, oh, the rapture's coming, and they've calculated it using scripture and the calendar and all this. Everyone's always trying to figure it out. But the
Mhm.
reality of the situation is that, Ryan, I could tell you exactly when the judgment is coming for me and you. I could tell you. Do you want to know?
When we die.
Sometime in the next 50 years. It's
Mhm.
happening, right?
Mhm.
Knock on wood, maybe I live longer, maybe I live less, but realistically, sometime in the next 50, 40, 60 years, we are going to meet Christ. Now, if you said, look, we know for certainty that the second coming of Christ is happening in 40 years, how would people start preparing? People would start preparing pretty quick. They're like, wow, Jesus is coming back 40 years on this date. Let's go. We got to get holy. But that's the reality for everybody. Everyone is going to die and have that judgment and meet Christ as their judge. So I think that preparation for a good holy death is a great way to contemplate that. Keep that in mind. I mean, you always see the pictures of saints with a skull on their desk, so that they're always contemplating death. And a lot of great saints would spend parts of every morning in contemplation of death and prayers for holy death. So that's something I'd recommend everyone pick up in their devotional life too. Um, Saint Philip Neri. Saint Philip Neri was kind of a comedian saint. He's really known for being just funny and approachable, and creating the, oratories and just being like a really gregarious and awesome guy. And his last words were kind of advice. And Ryan, I think we are kind of in the vein of Saint Philip Neri. We're probably not the austere intellectual heavyweights that would go toe to toe with Saint Jerome. We probably fall more in the St. Philip Neri camp, but here was his last words of advice, and I think they're good for us and for everyone listening, which is be humble and be lowly. So just be humble, be low. Great advice from a dying saint.
God exalts the humble.
That's it.
And it's, again, you're going back to, I don't know, the presence of other people there, and the
Hmm.
witness that he showed in dying. And I mean, that was kind of where Jen's passing was everybody's like, she taught us how to die. She taught us how to die. So
Hmm.
that was kind of her gift on the way out. She didn't use any words towards the end, but that was a beautiful expression of that.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about that when Jen was diagnosed with uh, glioblastoma, which my father-in-law also had. And when he was
Mhm.
diagnosed and said, look, this is incurable, this will end up getting you, he said, well, I've taught you how to live. Now I'm going to teach you how to die. And it was that same kind of service unto death, which is, oh, Lord, something I wish everybody and myself in particular can have service unto death, which,
Yeah.
really is, you know, not everyone's going to be a martyr, but service unto death is a form of martyrdom to oneself. So I definitely think that that's another thing that we can learn from this.
Yeah, and the fact that you can do it, I think there's a dynamic there at play where you and I certainly saw it in Jen, is like, "You're taking this away from me," right? My family, everything I've lived for you for, but this is your new cross. This is your new direction, and embracing that and saying, "This is a part of God's plan for me, for my family, for those around me." It's just, this is the path. This is the way that God's chosen, and to embrace it,
Hmm.
with love and with trust, you
Yep.
know?
Last one in the saints category that I have here is Padre Pio. Padre Pio, absolutely a mystic, a stigmatist, a confessor, purported to have performed multiple miracles while he was alive. And when he died, 1968, which is so recent, 1968, like for context, the Beatles were career was almost done, right?
Mhm.
Like that's
Yep.
how recent it was. Like Padre Pio probably had heard, I don't know, Jimi Hendrix, right?
Mhm.
That's how recent. But he seems like such a medieval mystic, so epic, stigmatist and confessions and
Reading
bilocations
souls.
and reading souls.
Yeah.
So these things still happen, but he just repeated on his deathbed. And there's a great video of his last mass, and you can see that he was, knocking on the door, but he just repeated,
Oh,
Jesus, Mary, Jesus and Mary. Just kept repeating that. Um, Again, just that simple trust that, you know, to Jesus through Mary. Um,
mm.
that's where his heart was at the end.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is not very long ago. We were born shortly after that.
Yeah, I was 12 years after that, or you were what, 7 years after that? You were born in
Yeah,
70. Yeah, crazy.
yeah,
Like 7 years
yeah.
before you was Padre Pio. Doesn't seem to add up, but like it does. So
No. We went and, went to see his relics in a church nearby. That was pretty powerful. Venerated
yeah,
them. It's great. Had one of the gloves that he had on his hand, some hair. I stood in line for a long time to, you know, pray with his relics. It was pretty cool. Really
you
cool.
know, everyone always loves the relics of hairs from saints, in particular masculine saints of their beard hairs. I don't know. My wife gets so upset when I leave so many beard hairs in the bathroom when I trim my beard. But I mean, I recognize it's a lot, but I think those things potentially, if you're going on
They have
future
some legs
value,
on it.
they got some legs. Look, if I could hold it together for another 40 so years, like we're talking about, those things no longer are a nuisance, but a treasure. So, remember that.
Just keep a little bin over there with all of them in there.
Dude, my beard grows like wildfire. It's crazy. I got to trim this thing all the time. It's got a mind of its own. Okay, so let's move on to some popes, and we can move through these ones a little bit quicker. So here is the last word. Here are the last words of 10 famous popes. So Gregory the Seventh, he died in exile, right? He was driven out of Rome, died in exile, and his last words: "I have loved justice and hated iniquity, therefore I die in exile." Um, Pope Pius V, very famous Dominican Pope, was the Pope who got together the Holy League, really helped spread the devotion of the Rosary. Pius V is an amazing, amazing Pope, amazing saint. You should learn more about him. He died of cancer, and whew, his words were, "Lord, increase my pain and increase my patience." Most people, when they're on, when they're sick, they really want the suffering to be over. They really want to shy away from the pain. And here is this saint and pope asking for more pain, which um, boggles the mind.
Boggles the mind, yeah. Um, yeah, you want the grace of a happy death, and he just wanted more prayers, you
Yeah,
know? Give me some more so I can offer it back up in that
wow.
unison,
Yeah, you're right. Give me
uniting
more
with
so I can
God's
offer it.
suffering.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Pius the Ninth, the longest serving pope, and really the pope who went through the biggest transition since probably the legalization of the church under Constantine. Pope Pius the Ninth was the pope when the Vatican lost the papal states, where the unification of Italy happened, and the Pope was driven back and kind of forced to never leave the Vatican. So he was very much in this time where the church was struggling to exist. I mean, it went from controlling most of central Italy to not even having what we know of as the Vatican today, but being stuck in St. Peter's. That was it. There was no treaty. The Italian army had sent in, forces and took the city. And he really was a guardian of the church and shepherded the papacy from what we could look at as the medieval and Renaissance era popes into the modern popes. He is the transition, a very, very important pope in history. And he said his last words were, "Guard the church I loved so well and sacredly." There's a man devoted to the church, even to his deathbed, longest serving pope in history, did so much for the church to preserve and protect, and he's still on his deathbed, like his children, saying, "Protect this church, preserve it, love it like I did."
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of very fitting with where he was,
Yeah.
in his life.
Um, Pius the 11th. Pius the 11th was the Pope when World War II was breaking out. And Pius the 11th really was heartbroken at the prospect of another war in Europe like had happened just 20 years before in World War I. He'd seen how destructive it was, how it tore apart the fabric of Christian Europe to the point where I don't think Europe has ever really recovered from World War I, let alone World War II. And Pius the 11th, he died of a heart attack, and his last words were peace, 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 because he knew what was coming. He knew the storm that was about to be unleashed, both in bloodshed, both in troops and mechanization, but also on the rips and tears that he was going to put into the fabric of Christendom. And you can really see that. I mean, again, Christendom is not recovered from World War I and World War II. And, I firmly believe the thought of that killed him, gave him a heart attack, and he died just begging for peace.
Yeah, it's amazing how the last two popes and their circumstances, the situation with the West,
Yeah.
guides even their last words. I mean, you just think, leading up to that, just the amount of prayer that they internalized for all these things, that it's almost became a mantra of their heart,
Yeah,
even at the last breath.
some popes get to reign during good times, other in bad times. And these two popes definitely reigned during very difficult times. And their time in the chair of St. Peter was one of toil and one of trying to hold it together and trying to be a sign of unity and to create peace. Difficult time to be a pope. I mean, you could be a pope in the Middle Ages where it's just all eating grapes and painting
Right.
frescoes. These guys did not have it so easy. So definitely pray for their intercession.
Mm.
Pius the 12th, who succeeded Pius the 11th, again, one of my favorites. I think it's a shame that his cause for canonization hasn't proceeded faster. But he was, I think, if you ask me, if you were to, let's draw the prototype of what a pope should look like, act like, talk like, pray like, and administer like, it would be Pius the 12th. I love him. And his last words were, "Pray that souls may be saved." And I really do think that the job of the universal pastor of the church, the Pope, is to guard and safeguard the sheep that Christ entrusts to the church. So that was even his dying thoughts, really shows that Petrine character, that pastor's mind, that pray that souls may be saved. Where Pius XI was worried about the war, Pius XII was praying about the internal war, the internal crisis, worried about the soul, not just the body. So very interesting.
Beautiful.
John the 23rd, that they may be one, right? The ut unum sint, that great command, that great prayer of Jesus, that they all may be one. I think we can see that John the 23rd really was trying to, in calling the Second Vatican Council, whether you are pro V2, pro not, whatever, I definitely assuredly think his intention in doing that was to bring together the church, to find the church's voice and place, in a new modern world, whether that was effective or not. He definitely was trying to do that so the church can continue to be one, because it was definitely some fractious times.
Starting to notice a difference between the popes and then those in religious orders
Mhm.
in
Well,
their
it's what their
last
concerns
words.
are. Yeah.
Yeah, their pastoral yeah, just the pastoral implications of even their dying words,
Mhm.
versus more of the espousal or Jesus, Mary, like or the Marian one that Saint Ligori had. Like, you
Yeah.
start really seeing how your death is a grace, it's a grace for your toils, it's a grace for, your espousal
Mhm.
in a religious order. Uh, Pretty neat to see that delineation.
Well, it speaks to their charism, right? These saints
Yeah.
largely were religious orders or contemplatives, and their charism was very much on that contemplative focus on Christ.
Yeah.
Whereas the popes are, administrators, they're universal pastors, and that's where their charism lies. You can see that Christ called the right people, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Paul the Sixth, Saint Paul the Sixth. My days on earth are ending, but Christ lives on. It's beautiful.
Wow.
Um, we're going to skip John Paul the First because he died in his sleep, and we have no known last words besides maybe I'm going to bed. We don't know for certain. Pope Saint John Paul II. He died in 2005. I love this, and this really reflects if you know the life of John Paul II. Let me go to the house of the Father. John Paul II's mother died very young. His father was everything to him, but he also died young. And then that yearning, that really, I would say, not childlike in simplicity, but very much as a son. He viewed God that he wanted just to go back to the Father's house, to go back to that place where he really belongs. I think
Um,
that's just really beautiful.
yeah, it's like, one of the in the litany of the Holy Spirit, one of the charisms of the Holy Spirit is the spirit of adoption, you
Hmm.
know?
Yes, good.
Um,
Yes.
and, yeah, I mean, that is a spirit, that in those, you know, those states of a child growing up or somebody who's lost a parent, experience.
Yeah. A lot of times we think of Benedict the 16th as this super high-minded theologian, professor who just wrote things that would just boggle and twist the mind, and he very much
He
was
did.
that. He did.
Yeah.
He as a matter of fact, we think that because that is what he did. That being
Mhm.
said, his dying words were so simple. "Lord, I love you." Right? And to
Uh,
me, it kind of that made me think of Thomas Aquinas, when, "Thomas, you've written well of me. What do you want? Only you, Lord." Benedict the 16th, had a similar mind and charism, but just said, "Lord, I love you." That was his dying word. Um, Gives you a deeper insight into the interior life of Benedict the 16th
right.
than I think most people would have really been able to glean from his public ministry.
Right. Powerful theologian, but very gentle, childlike faith, loved his cats, a nice cold beer every now and then, and to play his piano.
Yeah. I really love Benedict the 16th.
I do too.
Really, that's my kind of guy. You just
Yes.
I love him.
Yeah.
Um, there's no consensus on what the last words of Francis were, but from what I could tell, and because he was really struggling to talk
Yeah.
at the end of his life, and thinking back, it's only been a few months, but just thinking back and remembering how vigorous he was when he first was elected to seeing him in those last days. The same thing with John Paul II, right? You can see in your mind that young Pope and then that Pope on death's door. But what I could find was that his last words, and this was crazy because he didn't physically to get out into St. Peter's Square the day before he died. Um, you know,
Mm, difficult.
it probably took more strength than you could possibly imagine. And his last words reportedly were, "Thank you for taking me to the square." Right. And I think that's a good kind of reflection on Francis, that he wanted to go to the square. He always wanted to go to the people. What you think of his legacy or his pontificate, which still has years to be uh, examined and contemplated, he
Contemplated, yeah.
wanted he wanted to go to the square. He wanted to go to the people. He wanted to be, he always said that the pastor should smell like the sheep. And even his dying wish, it was his last wish, was to go to the square to get the scent of the sheep on him.
Mm.
And I think it's a
Y
beautiful reflection on his pontificate.
yeah, it sure is.
Um, I'm sorry, Ryan. Is there somewhere else you have to be? Are you getting texts?
No, I have it on
I'm
not
just
I
joking.
have it on do not disturb, but my daughter doesn't think that's good enough for her.
Uh, yeah. Yeah, I understand it all too well. Okay, so then the last segment that we're going to do, and these ones are very powerful, and it's 10 last words of martyrs. Now, there's so many out there. I just, I couldn't pick all of them, but I picked some ones that kind of showed a variety of sentiments and situations. So obviously the first martyr, Saint Stephen, this one comes right from scriptures, Acts 7:60. He was stoned in Jerusalem for preaching Christ. And he said, this is from Acts 7, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. Very, very powerful when you think of this is the first person to die in witness of Christ. And even then he's saying, don't hold this sin against him. Right. And then receives his crown. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
One of the more influential, and you wouldn't know this, but for the early church, in the way that they approached martyrdom, in the way that they approached persecution by the empire, was St. Polycarp of Smyrna. And he was one of the most venerated early saints. So much so that, the Romans destroyed his body by burning it. But then the people who collected his ashes said his ashes are worth more than pure gold. And he was martyred in 155. The proconsul of Smyrna, which is like the west coast of Turkey, it used to be the Greek area. He was given the choice to curse Christ and worship Caesar. And Polycarp was very old at this point. Polycarp knew St. John. He was St. John's disciple. So it goes from Jesus to St. John to Polycarp. I mean, and we have his words, and so it's kind of like that second generation of apostles, but it's so close. He knew St. John intimately and learned from him. And he was an old man, just like John was. So, and his last words were, when given the choice to deny Christ and to worship Caesar, he said, 86 years I have served him, and he has never done me any wrong. Why would I forsake him now? He's like, look, I'm 86. Christ has been good to me for 86 years. I'm going to right at this last moment, renounce that. Why would I do that? Right. Now they take that into comparison to Voltaire, right? The Enlightenment thinker. A priest came in and offered him and said, you're dying, take this time to renounce Satan. And Voltaire said famously, well, this is no time to be making any enemies. Right. Which, clever, kind of humorous, but also incredibly dark, that he wouldn't even renounce Satan just in case Satan might be able to help him on his deathbed, right? So you can see the courage that Polycarp had. This is probably, I think, in the church, in Christendom, outside the words of the 7 last words of Christ, is the most famous last words of any. And Ryan, you'll know it immediately, St. Lawrence. St. Lawrence was under the Emperor Valerian. He was the deacon of the Church of Rome, and they were confiscating the goods of the church. They said, you need to bring all the riches of the church and present them to the prefect, because we're seizing your assets. And what St. Stephen did was he took all the poor and all the widows and the homeless and said, these are the treasures of the church, which is 100% true, but this is also 100% something that is going to piss off a prefect who said, I wanted gold. And that's and I'm sure that was the intent too of St. Lawrence, right? I remember one time I got a speeding ticket and I was so upset by it that I went and I got about like 110 $1 bills and crumpled them up, put them in a bag, and paid that. Kind of.
Oh, you're one of those guys?
Oh, I was really mad because it's very unjust, and I was like 22, and I was an idiot.
Gosh.
So he was condemned to death by being burnt alive on a gridiron, on a grill. And this is I don't know, this was in the most badass saints episode we did. This is one of the most badass things anyone's ever said. It's more badass than Clint Eastwood or John Wayne or John Wick. They're burning this man alive on a grill. And this is why he's the patron saint of comedians and cooks. He looks at them and says, turn me over. I'm done on this side.
Mm-hmm. I saw an icon. I think it was an icon or just an art piece, definitely ancient. And he was, like, upside down, like, his head was on the ground. Like, so they went from, like, turn him over to, like, flipping him this way, and then there's, like, people in the back, representing, who he brought to the prefect. It was really cool artistic impression of that.
Just to have the presence of mind while being tortured to death on flames, to be able to be
Yeah.
that present
Yeah.
is
And that
just
humorous too.
right.
Like,
And you turn me over, I'm done on this side. Crazy. Absolutely
indirect
crazy.
way of asking for more,
Ask
you
you for
know,
more, but it also
pain.
is kind of like, hey, I know you guys have to do this. Let's, hey, we're in this together. Let's kind of whistle past the graveyard. I don't know his intention, but it's just
We're in this
astounding.
together, guys. I think
Yeah.
you can flip me over.
Yeah. You guys are just a couple poor legionaries and you guys are carrying it out. Let's, since
Yeah.
we're here, let's have a good time with it at least. Right.
Jeez.
Another saint famously martyred at the stake. It's 3 in a row now. Which was a very common punishment by Romans, but this one's medieval. That's Saint Joan of Arc.
Mm.
Um, this happened during the context of the 100 Years' War between England and France. Saint Joan of Arc was, on the French side. This is, kind of the war between the Avenger and crowned lands of France. Very fascinating history, but she was captured by the English, and she was given the choice to deny her visions that Christ was giving to her or be executed, and she wouldn't. So she was executed on the stake, and she just repeated the name Jesus over and over as she was burned to death.
Hmm. Great story.
Um, Now, I mean, look, we're into the part of the story where the English just be killing people left and right. And for all you Englishmen out there who are Catholics, thank God. For all you English who are not Catholics, you haven't been very cool to us Catholics over the course of the last 500-600 years. And, starting with Joan of Arc, now we're on to St. Thomas More. He was executed under the command of Henry VIII because he wouldn't sign the Act of Supremacy, which basically said that the king was the head of the church, not the Pope. And St. Thomas More was the archetypal statesman and good
Mhm.
public servant and lawyer who was ethical and upright. And he said his last words were, because he wouldn't renounce Rome and say that King Henry VIII was the head of the church. But he said he was not betraying him because he was essentially being killed for treason. But he said, I die the king's good servant, meaning I'm not committing treason, but God's first. That my allegiance to God, even though I'm a great statesman and a loyal subject, my allegiance is to God over any earthly power.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's a movie I think is of Kings and Men. Is that the movie that was
Uh,
his story?
it's on. Wow. Oh no, why can't I remember it? It's A Man for All Seasons.
A Man for All Seasons.
Yeah,
That's what it was.
yeah,
Great movie about his life.
yeah. Very good movie. Cardinal Wolsey and all that. Yeah. Then the very next day, the English are still at it. The very next day, St. John Fisher, right, who sometimes is overshadowed by Thomas More, but St.
Yeah.
John Fisher, he was beheaded also because he also refused to um, sanction Henry VIII's divorce and the Act of Supremacy. And he had to approve both of those and the marriage, otherwise be killed. And he said, I die for the faith of Christ's holy Catholic Church. Again, given the choice, like today, I mean, we look at people getting divorced. We turn a blind eye to all sorts of things because we're like, that's somebody else's problem. Our politicians now are like, look, I will pretty much back anything. You want, full term abortions? I mean, if you give me enough funding for my campaign, I'll back anything you want. I mean, our
Mhm.
politics now have become pretty much selling out to whoever the highest bidder is, regardless of ethics. But these were men who had ethics that were willing to go to their execution rather than to betray their conscience. And how many politicians can we say of that in today's world? Not very many.
Yeah, they wanna drag the church into their political gain.
Yep.
Um, and I mean, that's how the Church of England started, you know? He had to find a new church,
Yeah.
because he couldn't kill everybody, just the
Well,
ones around him.
he did a pretty good job of it because you know what?
Uh,
Here we are now. His daughter still out there killing Catholics. The English would be wild, and man.
yeah,
Saint Edward Campion, Jesuit, great saint. He was coming into England from France because the Catholic Church was completely outlawed. The celebration of the Catholic Mass was outlawed. You had the recusancy, which was basically the underground Catholic Church in England, and they had things like priest holes where Catholic families who were secretly Catholic would build like little passageways in their house where priests could hide. And there was an official office in the government of England called a priest hunter. Crazy story. You got to learn more
wow,
about it, right?
gee,
But he was captured, Edmund Campion, very much like a saint we'll talk about later. Um, he was captured and he was executed under Elizabeth I. And he got kind of, you know, Thomas More and John Fisher got the mercy of a beheading.
yeah,
Edmund Campion being a Jesuit priest, which, no bueno to the English at the time. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered, and his body parts spread throughout London. And he was given the choice to renounce Rome, renounce the Holy Catholic Church, or die. And he just said, then I die a true Catholic, which, you know, nowadays when people say, well, the church is, teaches against birth control, against abortion, against, um,
y-
any number of things that people are ambivalent towards, they'll say, yeah, I follow the church, but not that. Where these people will get their heads cut off in complete fidelity to the church. And that's why
mhm,
they're models for all of us.
a lot of conviction, you know,
Absolutely. This one, there's that movie that just came out by the Ambrosio, um, about Saint Maximilian Kolbe. Just check it out. I hear it's a good movie done by a nice Catholic guy, done very well. So if that's something you can support, you should, and learn more about Saint Maximilian Kolbe. But Saint Maximilian Kolbe was a priest who was sent to Auschwitz concentration camp, and a prisoner attempted escape. So the Nazi guards there said, well, since somebody attempted escape, we're going to kill 10 men. And they went through and they picked 10 men. And one of them was a man who had a family. He had a wife and children. And he's pleading for his life because he's trying to shepherd his family through, a Jewish man trying to shepherd his family through this concentration camp. And Maximilian Kolbe comes up and says, this man has a family. I'm a Catholic priest. I volunteer to take his
right?
spot. He volunteered to take his spot. He was not going to be executed, and he volunteered. Now, that is, there's no greater love than to lay down your life for another. That is truly, truly living up to that command of Christ. And St. Maximilian Kolbe, he was starved, um, deprived water and food. And when everyone else had died, he was still alive and finally given an injection of carbolic acid, which stopped his
Burns,
heart. Yeah, stopped his
yeah,
heart. And when they were giving him that injection, after he lived way longer than they thought he would, he just whispered, Hail Mary, Ave Maria. And then and took the execution. But the courage of that man, I mean, if you ever see a picture of him, the resolve you see in his eyes and in his jaw that's a man who had courage and conviction beyond what a mortal man can have. He was definitely assisted in that grace by our Lord and by the saints.
beautiful. Triumph of the Heart. That's the name of the
Triumph
movie.
of the heart. Yeah, that's it. Ryan, we went to see this saint, this blessed. We went to see his relics. We were lucky enough to hold pieces of his hand, his actual bones,
Wow.
and see the costumes. Blessed Miguel Pro. And
Yeah,
Blessed Miguel Pro was very much like Edmund Campion. He was a priest under a government persecution of the Catholic faith. He was using hideouts and using costumes. I mean, he dressed up as a businessman. He dressed up as clowns to be able to move around and to continue to minister as a priest. But
got
eventually he
sold
was,
out by a maid.
it's always the
By a
maids, Ryan.
maid. Yeah.
Who did it? It was the maid with the mouth in the parlor. Um, But, there's a very famous picture of his execution where he's got his arms stretched out in, again, imitation of Christ on the cross. Um, and there was the rallying cry of the Mexicans, the Cristeros, and he shouted, "Viva Cristo Rey," which is one of the great rally cries of all time. "Viva Cristo Rey" of the
Yeah.
Cristeros. Should definitely, there was a movie with Andy Garcia. It's called Cristeros. You should check that out.
Mhm.
Totally, very worth your time to watch that. Um, but arms spread out, "Viva Cristo Rey," long live Christ the King, and went to his death. And we saw the actual outfit, the sweater he was wearing, the bullet holes
Mhm.
in it. It was amazing. But you know, I think the president of Mexico at the time was Plutarco Calles, and he was trying to make an example, saying, "Look, this is what happens when you don't fall in line and when you don't kind of bend to us on what we're espousing of the Catholic faith." But it blew up in his face because they took these pictures thinking it was going to be a warning. But just like how the Romans thought executing Christ on a cross was going to be a warning, it actually became a sign of hope, which
Right.
is, you know, the ways of God confound mortal men for sure.
Yeah, and this like all this leading up to it, he was a sign of hope in his community, the way he like risked his life every day to pray mass with people inside the houses. Some days he'd pray like 20 or 30 masses
Mm,
going to people's houses. And so, talk about a guy that lived, long live Christ. I mean, he knew that, when these folks were receiving communion, Christ's body was being sanctified, you
yeah.
know? And yeah, so I mean, we saw some of his disguises too. He went around
Actually,
dressed as a clown and,
I
a
think I have that.
mechanic.
I think I have that relic right here, actually, in my travel book. That's Tolton Rosary. Here's my roses from Guadalupe, from Tepeyac. Uh, Here it is. Here we go. I actually did have it. There's a relic. That was,
Yeah.
yeah. Remember we got those? They gave us that at the
Yeah,
church.
that was a beautiful experience of prayer we had there.
Absolutely. Yeah. By the way, this book, I take this on all my pilgrimages and all my trips, and I keep all my holy stuff and notes in there. It's a good one. Last one. Saint Ignatius of Antioch. There's a famous painting of him. He was fed to the lions. Look, man, if there's ways to go, being fed to the lions does not sound like one that I'd want to have. I hopefully will die comfortably in my bed, surrounded by loved ones, preferably not in the mouth of lions, but if God wills it, so be it. That being said, all Saint Ignatius had to do was burn just a little incense to the emperor. He didn't have to worship him, didn't have to kiss his feet, didn't even have to look him in the face, didn't have to pay taxes, didn't have to do anything. Just, dude, light this incense on behalf of the emperor and acknowledge that Caesar is Lord. And he wouldn't do it. And I love this because, we hear Christ say that unless a grain of wheat dies, it produces no life, right? He echoes that and said, "I am God's wheat, ground by the teeth of beast."
Wow.
And again, that Saint Ignatius, his death was galvanizing for the early church in Rome. I mean, he's one of the most famous early martyrs. He's, in the litany of the early martyrs of Rome, a very important saint. But by his death, life was created. Just like a grain of wheat dies, new life is created. And I am God's wheat, ground by the teeth of beasts.
And he probably witnessed, during the persecutions, he probably witnessed a lot of children and loved ones of family members that he was
Absolutely.
ministering to, their losses, but he also probably witnessed the fruit that came from that after they passed away, how it galvanized the members of the church to
Hmm.
continue and to keep going. So yeah, he's become one in the fold there, and it's a very beautiful thing that he said.
Yeah. Now we have a few last words for this episode. There's three things I want to get to. We're going to get to one last quote, which I think is, I don't want to say my favorite, but it's absolutely and easily the funniest quote, last words I've ever heard. And so stick around to hear that. But before we do, if you're still watching, click the like and subscribe button. It's the easiest way for you to participate in the mission of the Catholic Talk Show. When we look at our analytics, over 75% of the people who watch our show do not do the simple task of just clicking like and subscribe. So if you could do that, it helps us reach more people. It helps the all powerful algorithm recognize what we're doing and gets more people to hear the things that we're doing. So we really appreciate when you do that. Also, we cannot make this show without your support. Ryan and I have had a crazy difficult 18 months, with so much change to what it is. We lost our studio, we lost our producer, we lost didn't lose, but no longer able to participate, the priest and a friend of our show. Brian lost his wife. We've lost a lot, but through God's grace, we're continuing. And to be able to continue to do this show, we have relied on your support because we could not do it without your prayers or your financial support. So if you go to CatholicTalkShow.com/Patreon, you can see all the different tiers and easy ways you can support us. We are not asking for massive donations. We're asking just for pocket change to help us continue to do the show so we can pay for things like cameras, lights, editing services, and things like that. See all the tiers that they're cheap, as little as $5. And we have tons of great gifts to give you in return. Things like hoodies, hats, coffee mugs, rosaries, devotionals, and more. We really appreciate all your financial support. So to all of our patrons who are already supporting us, thank you so much. We pray for you and are so grateful. And for all of you considering, we really appreciate your generous contemplation on this. Now, Ryan, the last one. I was doing the research for this one. I told you about this one before we even started recording. And I almost told you it, but I said, no, I'm not going to tell you because I want to give it away in the episode so I can get your actual reaction. So there was a nun. Let me see if I could find. She died in 1732. Now, number one, her name is amazing. It's awesome. Her name was Louise Marie Therese de Saint Maurice, right? So Louise Marie Therese of Saint Maurice. Great alliterative name. So
she's got two Maurices in there. Just, got to throw an extra.
Louise Marie Therese of Saint Maurice. So Louise Therese Maurice. Great name. For any young woman out there contemplating a religious name as you enter an order, consider Louise Therese Maurice. It's a great name. Or
something that rhymes.
It's fun to say. It's just fun to say. Anyway, she was on her deathbed and she's about to die. And the nurses were there saying, it does not look good. You're not going to make it. And the French nun, Louise Therese Maurice, let out a massive, massive fart. Massive fart. And said, any woman who can fart is not yet dead.
What? What?
Yep. She's like, I think the context was, they come in, they're like, oh, I think sister is passed.
She's
and
dead.
She's like, she's dead.
Yeah.
And she's like, honk. She's like, she's like, a woman who can fart isn't dead yet. It's going to take more than that.
You know what I was thinking about when they used to hit the head with the hammer to see if somebody was dead?
Yeah. But they do that.
Maybe that was continued into the 1700s until you shared this. So yeah, they probably, okay, guys, let's, sisters passed and make the sign of the cross. She's like, nope.
Not yet. Not done yet. Here's a little kiss for you before we go.
That's quite a way to go out right there. Same.
Well, everyone farts, Ryan. Everyone farts.
Yeah.
Everybody
farts.
Even dying holy sisters on their deathbed. And I just think, again, it's hilarious, but also true. Dead women don't fart, nor do dead men. So this is a great episode. I think this is number one, it's great to explore a little bit of the lives of these saints, these popes, these martyrs, to consider people's last thoughts on this earthly journey, to consider the 7 last words of Christ, and then to consider how all of these holy men and women died. Again, I just want to implore everyone watching this to contemplate your own death, to find those prayers for a good and holy death, to pray to St. Joseph about this, to do the 7 last words of Christ devotion, and remember your death because it's happening. We're all going to die. And the more that you can contemplate and prepare for it, I think the happier you will be when you meet Christ face to face and have to answer for yourself. So thanks for watching,
And be clear in your conscience and don't take bitterness and unforgiveness with you, be ready. Be ready to receive the Lord, and you'll take everything good in your life there along the way. Don't know
Yep.
what your last words might be, but as long as you're prepared, they'll be good. Unless, you got to fart or something. Like, I mean, not that that
Uh,
wasn't good, but anyways, we've covered
it's
enough
maybe
here.
it's maybe not the most eloquent, but it's certainly memorable.
You'll have words or sounds or something.
All right,
As
Ryan.
Yeah, it's great hanging out with all you guys this week. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining the Catholic Talk Show.